Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. Week 2 of XFL is here, and I've got a DraftKings first look for you for this week's slate of 4 games. We're going to go through each position. We're going to look at a bunch of different players. We have some knowledge now that we did not have last week, where last week was a lot of guesswork. Now we at least have some stats. We have some targets, shares to look at. We know who's getting the ball, which running backs are getting the snaps, where we did not have this going into week 1. So we got a little bit more knowledge. It's a game of partial information. The analogy that I made last week was that we were like under the gun at a poker table and you just have no information at that point. Now we're moving around a little bit. Obviously the dealer button has the most information, and the more the season goes on, the more information we're going to have and the better decisions that we can make moving forward. But the counterbalance to that is the more information that everybody has, the lower the edge becomes. So if you've got some very strong takes about XFL and you think that everybody else is crazy because they're not talking about your guy that you know is going to get a bunch of targets or more carries than they expect, or going to be more involved in the red zone or inside the 5-yard line, then you need to play those plays, because that's your edge right now. If you have information or a strong feel about something that is going to go the way that you believe it's going to go, or a game or a team that is underrated versus what the public believes that they are, because right now you're going to get a lot of people. They're going to be parroting information from sites or places that they feel are right. And the other way that this is going to go is now we have 1 week of information, and whack-a-mole is going to be running rampant in week 2 for all the analysis. Well, this guy got 10 targets last week, so therefore he's going to get 10 targets every week. And we're just going to, we all have to get on that guy now. The guy had like 4, 5, or 6 targets. It's very viable that person's going to have 1, 2, or 3 in the next week. We also have teams that were playing against defenses last week that they're not playing against this week. So we really have to pay attention, in my opinion, to which teams have good offensive lines, which teams have better quarterback play, more aggressive play calling, and that's going to lead us down the road. And XFL fantasy is going to play a little bit differently than NFL fantasy, because NFL, we want to stack as much running back volume as we can get into our lineups. And I just don't think that this league is going to play that way. Kind of alluded to it last week that you're going to have to take a little bit more chances with your flex positions with wide receivers, because teams are just going to throw the ball a lot more, because they can't really establish the run as well as you can in the NFL level. And most of the plays are going towards passing. Only 4 running backs last week top 10 carries. So it's not really a place that we can hang our hats, is the running back position. So if you guys would go into the comments and leave me a comment down below, let me know what you liked about week 1 of XFL, whether it was the broadcast, things that they did, your user experience playing daily fantasy, if you gambled with it, just betting the spreads and the totals and everything else. How was your experience with XFL different from NFL? What did you like? Tell me some things that you liked about week 1 of XFL, whether as a fantasy player, as a viewer, or as just a football fan, because I'm very interested to know, because I want to know if this is a thing that's going to be sticky as we move forward throughout this 10-week XFL season. Also, in my pinned comment down below, I've started a second YouTube channel. There's going to be podcasts there. The Gaming the Game podcast lives there. Episode 1 is up with my origin story, for lack of a better term, how I got involved in daily fantasy and producing content from basically 20 people a show on Grinders Live to ending up on ESPN. So that whole story is already there, and I'm going to be interviewing a lot of other content creators from fantasy football space, as well as many other industries as well, to find out how they got started and how they got to where they are. So if you're interested in that, do me a solid, go drop a subscribe on that channel to say thank you, I guess, for the content that I put out for NFL and XFL here. Let's get to this slate. I appreciate you guys. I really do. Thank you very much for showing up once again. Tremendous support on last week's video for week 1. On this slate for week 2, we have the New York Gardens. That wouldn't have been a bad team name, but they are not that. They are the New York Guardians, going to DC to play the Defenders. So by name, a very defensive battle, but I don't think it's going to be, because I don't think there's going to be very many defensive battles in this league. Guardians are 5-point underdogs going to DC. The Tampa Bay Vipers, traveling to Seattle, are 2.5-point favorites. The Dallas Renegades, 4.5-point favorites against the Los Angeles Cougars. And the St. Louis Battlehawks, who are thought to be the worst team in the league coming into the season, going up against Houston, thought to be one of the better teams coming into the season. 8.5-point favorites are the Houston Roughnecks, with the highest total on the slate, or implied total on the slate, of 50 points. So most of these games sit between 46 and 50. So all the games are pretty much close on totals from the place that I could find totals. They're obviously not up on the DK Sportsbook. I think the Action Network had estimated what they believe the totals to be. So very high offensive outputs. Only 4 running backs, like I said, had over 10 carries in week 1, which leads us to having to lean on quarterbacks. And in week 1, Philip Walker was an absolute monster, throwing it 39 times, 4 touchdowns, but only 272 yards, 32 DraftKings points. Do we really feel that they're going to be able to be as efficient through the air as he was in week 1? Now, obviously, he has a little bit of rushing ability, 4 for 26 on the ground. St. Louis is going to try to run the ball as best they can. If the Roughnecks are extremely efficient again, I expect multiple touchdowns out of Walker. I don't know if I expect 4 touchdowns out of Walker. That's probably an outlier. We'll have to see if that's something that just this offense is going to provide moving forward. Josh Johnson sat out week 1. We're going to have to pay attention to depth charts. We're going to have to pay attention to injury reports and everything as week 2 moves along, because the drop off from Josh Johnson, no matter what you think about him as a quarterback talent, in terms of this league, he is very much a talented quarterback, and that Los Angeles offense is not going to produce the same way with their backups starting the game and playing in the game, as opposed to if Josh Johnson plays. So if he does not play, that Dallas defense does project to get a lot of pressure, because the Wildcats, or the Cougars offensive line, did not do a fantastic job in week 1, allowing the most hurries, allowing the most quarterback hits, allowing the most pressures. Something we're going to have to monitor moving forward. That either is going to be the defense that they played against in week 1, right? That's going to be a situation where the team they played against is just going to be the highest pressure defense that is out there, or maybe their offensive line is the worst in the league. That's going to lead to that. Cardale Jones looked pretty good, but only threw it 26 times because they got out to a pretty big lead. 2 touchdowns, 235, only 26 attempts. I think that they're going to have to throw it a little bit more moving forward, but they go up against New York, who did pretty well defensively this week. And a lot of people are going to look, like I said, the whack-a-mole is going to be intense this week, right? Where like people are going to see this red first and say, oh, it's the worst matchup. It's one game. So like, do as best as you can to ignore this opponent's rank column, at least for week 2, 3. At that point, we just don't know who these defenses are yet, and we just don't know if they just faced an offensive juggernaut, or if the other team got ridiculously lucky in the short term to put them where they are. And obviously, we also had bad quarterback play from somebody like Aaron Murray for Tampa Bay, who made a defense look really good, made New York look really good defensively with 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles lost. So that defense looked a lot better than against him than probably it's going to look against Cardale Jones. So Cardale is definitely in play for me this week. Matt McGloin, again, 29 attempts, ran for a touchdown, threw for a touchdown, only 182 for the Guardians, as they were in kind of a knockdown dragout. Landry Jones is the wild card here at only 9,500. Monitor him, see what his injury looks like, because this could be a situation where if he is the quarterback for Dallas, as much as they want to throw the ball, I think that he is extremely viable. Ta'amu looked exceptionally good this week, running the ball 9 times for 77 yards and throwing it 27 times with great efficiency, 74% completion rate, and a touchdown. They're going to be playing from behind. He's going to run the ball probably between 7 and 12 times this week. So you do have that floor. Whether or not he converted into touchdowns is what's going to dictate whether or not he has a 25-point day or an 18 to 22-point day. But for the price, I think that he is probably the best value quarterback on this slate. But I don't know that I want to go value in the XFL with the way the offense is run, with the short slate that it is, and with the value that's out there at other positions. I think that we can afford to just pay up for Philip Walker against St. Louis and hope that that efficiency, at least from a first look perspective, hope that that efficiency moving forward is great. I think that Tamu is a better GPP play. Philip Walker, probably your best cash game play. Running back, as I said, we're not going to be able to hang our hats on running back volume in this league. Very simply because it sucks. Only 4 guys had 10 touches or more. And a lot of the players that people had as chalk last week, Cameron Artis-Payne, 2 attempts. Christine Michael, -0.1 points. Elijah Hood saw good volume for the league, was one of the 4 guys who had over 10 touches. Only 12 of them is playing at home against Dallas. So, like, we have to find other ways to go. The highest volume running back, or one of them, was DEVEON Smith. He rates very well this week going against Seattle as well. Saw 16 carries. Price went up from 6,300 to 7,500. Presley for DC was another chalk running back from week 1 that did not perform exceptionally well. Did have 2 catches on 3 targets, 12 attempts, only 31 yards. The offensive lines are not clearing up. I don't think that paying up at running back is something that I want to do in this league. So you're going to have guys that we're going to look at, like possibly James Butler, who has a little bit of involvement in the passing game, gives us a little bit more salary relief. Did have 2 touchdowns. I'm not chasing those touchdowns, right? I'm just looking at how much do I have to pay to get usable volume out of one of these guys. Nick Holley, don't know if I want to use him at running back. I do think he's viable to use at flex because they signed him as a running back. He is still listed as a running back. He's only 4,800, which at least gives us that salary relief that we want, but he is one of their top route running wide receivers that they have, and that's how they're going to deploy him. So in DraftKings with full PPR, he's got to get a little bit more usage in terms of his targets, or he's got to find his way into the end zone to pay off this 4,800 tag. But if you're looking for value at the running back position, with at least knowing that he's going to get some easy passes thrown his way, you're not going to get carries out of him. You're not going to get 5 to 9 carries. And in my opinion, for him to be viable at the running back position, if he's going to fill up your 1 RB spot, he's priced fine as a wide receiver. But if you're going to fill your running back spot, I kind of want to fill it with somebody else that's either cheaper or has a little bit more usage. And for me, that guy is going to be Darius Victor. 3 catches in week 1, 9 carries in week 1. I saved $700 going from Butler to Victor, which gives me the money to do what I want to do with him. So we're going to plug him in as our running back. And again, it's like, if you want to try and chase the guys that get 20 carries, fine. If you want to pay up at running back, that's also fine with me if that's the way that you want to go. I'm looking for value there so that I can spend up at wide receiver. And just like in week 1, the receiver that I want to pay up for the most is Nelson Spruce. This guy was an absolute superstar in college in terms of fantasy. He has performed very well in the NFL during preseason. He is a good wide receiver, but not a spectacular NFL wide receiver. He's one of those guys that if I was going to compare him to like a baseball player, he's somebody who's better than AAA, but can't really be a superstar in the MLB, but goes to Japan and hits like 330 with 40 home runs. That's what Nelson Spruce is in terms of being an XFL type player. He's a quad A player. He's better than college, but he's not as good as being an every down starter in the NFL. But in terms of the AAF, in terms of preseason NFL, and in terms of this XFL league, Nelson Spruce coming off of a 15 target game. Now, I don't expect him to get 15 targets every single week. I don't. But if there is one wide receiver that I think that we could pencil in for 10 targets, for double-digit targets most weeks this XFL season, as we thought coming into the season, we now have more confirmation in week 1, and maybe it's just confirmation bias for me that I thought he was going to be a high target guy and a high catch guy, and he was a high target guy and a high catch guy in week 1. But that's kind of what I thought he was, and that's how he was deployed. So Nelson Spruce, the highest priced guy, but I think that we can afford him. There's a lot of high dollar wide receivers that we have to look at here. One of them moved up extremely. His price jumped from 4,100 to 8,900, and that's Khalil Lewis. Also, one of the Houston Roughnecks wide receivers, Sammy Coates, had all the air yards but couldn't turn them into catches. 9 targets last week. Sammy Coates has always had catching problems. He doesn't catch with his hands. He catches with his body, so his contested catch rate is going to be terrible. Because if they're close to him, he's not going to go up and attack the ball. He's going to wait for him to come to him, and then DBs can just kind of slap it away. But he remains in play. I think he's more of a GPP play than a cash game play because it's going to be hard for him to convert, or harder for him to convert targets into catches. But he is better than the DBs at this level, and it's going to matter if he just turns those targets into catches, because if he does, he has some of the biggest playability in this league. A couple of other guys at the top. Eli Rogers, 6 catches, 6 targets. PFF has him as 7 catches on 7 targets, so I don't know where the discrepancy is, but that's neither here nor there. 13 points for him. You're gonna pay up for wide receivers. Prohl was everybody's favorite coming into week 1, did not convert the targets into catches with 10 targets, which is awesome. Did have 2 touchdowns on only 5 catches. People are going to look at this, and they're going to look at this, right? They're going to look at his overall points per game, and people are going to chase those targets and play whack-a-mole in week 2, or chase those touchdowns and play whack-a-mole in week 2. At least we know that if you're going to chase these touchdowns, at least the targets are the thing that you should be chasing, and he had those in spades. Talked about Lewis. Badet was the other guy that people thought was going to get a ton of work. He didn't. Who else is up here that I wanted to talk about? There we go. Mikhail McKay for the Guardians, in a great spot against the DC defenders with their, I believe, inability to actually defend. We know that we have big playability with him because of the 45-yard catch that he brought in. They are going to challenge, and I think that their quarterback play was fine, if not stellar. Obviously, it wasn't great, but I think that it showed signs that they can actually do some things moving down the road. Mornay Pearson L at 8K, 4 catches, 4 targets. I want to try and load up as many guys as I can that had targets. So that means that we're going to have to find a little bit of value down here in this range, down in here, right? So like this 4K, 34K, or 3,500 to 4,500, 3,500 to 5K. I mentioned the running back you could play at flex, but I can't do that yet because I got to fill my second wide receiver spot. 8 targets for 3,900 is exactly where I want to end up. And Jalen Tolliver for Tampa Bay, who are favored in this game, playing up against Seattle, in Seattle. Obviously, I want to try, usually, I think it's just my own bias to focus on home teams that are, when there's bad quarterback play or bad offensive line play. I just think these guys are going to play better at home. Yes, they're professionals, but they're kind of like not NFL professionals. I liken it to the time that I spent as a junior college coach. Guys that go to junior college to play basketball, like they're basketball players who end up at junior college. They're not at junior college because they don't have the skills to play at Division I. They're at junior college because they don't have the discipline to play at Division I. That discipline can mean in the classroom, it can mean in the film room, it can mean on the practice floor. There is something that's missing for them to be able to perform, and sometimes it's physical, like in terms of the NFL, but a lot of times it's other off the field or out of practice sort of things that this person is just not very organized in their life to get them to that level. Tolliver looked like he could play to me. A lot of it came on 1 catch, obviously. He had 47 receiving yards, 44 of them came on 1 catch. But those 8 targets are what stands out the most. As I said, I want to focus on home players because of that organization. It's going to be easier for home players to perform. But if he got 8 targets on the road in their first game, I expect him to be heavily involved here in week 2. And there's very little risk, in my opinion, at 3,900. Even if he comes down to like 4 or 5 targets, we're not risking a lot to try and get him into our lineup. That leaves us with a couple of guys in flex. I mentioned a couple of wide receivers before. The first one that I talked about already, that I think is going to remain, at least in terms of his usage. He's not big and he's not very fast, but he is getting a good amount of looks and looks inside the red zone. Even though I don't think he's going to be the 40 or 50 yard breakaway guy, I don't think he's going to break very many big plays, but he's going to get peppered from the slot. He's going to get peppered on short yardage plays. with a team that I expect to score a lot of points this week. So I'm willing to pay up for Khalil Lewis here in week 2. My other flex spot, I used Tolliver. Sorry, apologies. My other flex spot, where is it? Williams. Is it him? Where's the other guy that I wanted to use here? Sorry, let me plug in the defense first. I'm going to go with the defenders on defense at 4,400 going up against New York. As I said, teams that are playing at home, I think they're going to be more organized a little bit and be able to get more pressure on the quarterback, which leaves us 7,700 for a flex. I can go with a second Tampa Bay wide receiver. I already had him. Looking at who's available here at flex, we have Smith from Tampa Bay. He was the one who had all the touches and all the targets. Seattle, not great. But like I said, only 4 guys got the rock as much as 10 or more times. 2 had 12, 1 had 16. And we could see some usage in the passing game from him. Elijah Hood at 12 touches as well for Los Angeles, playing at home against Dallas. But now that's going to give us a lot more money to spend. Pearson L, can't really afford to get up to him at 8,000 unless I come down on the defense, which for first look we could do, but I don't think is absolutely necessary. If I wanted to come down on defense, I would probably try to get up to somebody like Cam Phillips at 8,400 for Houston. Another wide receiver who got a lot of targets, 9 of them in week 1, did score a touchdown. But I think that we're going to go with the running back that got a lot of touches for Tampa Bay. Although they are playing on the road here, price came up from 6,300 to 7,500. Their quarterback play was god awful in week 1. Let's hope that it gets a little bit better in week 2. But I can get a little bit of volume here and open myself up. If you want to come down on the defense, from the 4,400 there to come down to the Guardians to be able to afford a more expensive wide receiver or flex spot, I'm fine with that. If you want to come down to Los Angeles, who's playing at home, although underdogs at 3,600 to be able to afford an even better second flex spot, I'm okay with that as well. But I'm going to go with the volume here. Even though I've got 2 Tampa Bay players in the lineup, at least I believe that they're in the lineup as far as first look is concerned. Be sure that you focus on the depth charts and the injury reports moving forward throughout the week, because that's going to be the most important thing, is making sure that you have the players that are on the field with the most opportunities as possible, especially in the red zone. Have some fun with XFL, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
He's a legend.